They say laughter is the best medicine, but in Golden Age Hollywood, one joke could be your death sentence. The studios loved a good prank, until the punchline landed in the headlines or embarrassed the wrong mogul. What happens when a single moment of mischief topples careers that seemed untouchable? Tonight, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to expose the pranks that cost stars everything. Sometimes, in Hollywood, the last laugh comes at a price no one saw coming. Rosco Fatty Arbuckle's fateful prank party. Hollywood in the early 1920s was a playground for the powerful, and no star ruled it quite like Rosco Fatty Arbuckle. His pranks were legendary, infamous even among the industry's biggest pranksters. But one joke at a wild San Francisco party didn't just go too far, it detonated his entire career, ending the reign of Hollywood's first true comedy king in a scandal so toxic, even being cleared of all charges couldn't save him. Arbuckle was famous for elaborate, outrageous pranks. He'd filled dressing rooms with live frogs, let loose barnyard animals during filming, or slip whoopee cushions onto the most dignified producers' chairs. But the party at the St. Francis Hotel on Labor Day weekend, 1921, was intended as a raucous break from the grind. Booze flowed freely, even as prohibition ruled. Showgirls, socialites, and studio fixers filled the rooms. Arbuckle, ever the jester, orchestrated a series of stunts meant to keep his guests laughing. But laughter turned to horror when actress Virginia Rapp fell violently ill. Rumors exploded. Some swore Arbuckle had pulled a crude prank that led to her collapse. Others whispered about spiked drinks and sadistic games. By the time the press got hold of the story, led by the vulture-like William Randolph Hearst, the details had mutated into monstrous legend that Arbuckle had accidentally or deliberately killed Rapp in some drunken joke gone wrong. The studio, fearing its reputation, cut him loose almost overnight. Arbuckle endured 3 criminal trials. Each dragged his reputation further through the mud, the tabloid headlines branding him as Hollywood's ultimate villain. The court finally acquitted him, but the real verdict had already been passed by the public and the studio system. Arbuckle's films were yanked from theaters, contracts shredded, and his name became unmentionable. He tried directing under a pseudonym, but the damage was permanent. What began as a night of rowdy Hollywood pranking ended with the destruction of a career once considered unbreakable. In old Hollywood, the line between a harmless joke and a life-ruining scandal could be razor thin, and for Arbuckle, that prank night in San Francisco was the end of the line. Clara Bow's studio sabotage prank. Clara Bow, the original It girl of the Roaring Twenties, lit up the silent screen with a wild, magnetic presence that made her Hollywood's favorite rebel. Behind the scenes, she was just as unpredictable, famous for irreverent jokes and practical jokes aimed at her stuffy studio bosses. But one prank, intended to strike back at the executives who policed her every move, would end up boomeranging so hard that it effectively sealed her fate in the industry she helped shape. By the late 1920s, Bow was exhausted by the suffocating grip of studio PR machines. She was a target for scandal sheets, whose gossip columnists delighted in fabricating stories about her love life and off-screen antics. In a moment of frustration, Bow decided to turn the tables, enlisting a trusted friend to leak a fake memo suggesting Paramount was planning to replace the entire publicity staff with her pet dogs and a flock of parrots. The memo, written in pitch-perfect business jargon, landed on the desks of some of the studio's most pompous executives. Within hours, the news was all over Hollywood, the press salivating at the notion that Bow was mocking the men in charge. But what started as an inside joke quickly spun out of control. The studio brass, already wary of Bow's reputation for independence, were furious. The press, eager for fresh dirt, turned the prank into headlines about her supposed instability and disrespect for authority. Whisper campaigns erupted. Was Clara Bow losing her mind? Was she too much of a liability? Suddenly, the pranks that once endeared her to co-stars and crew became ammunition in a new narrative. Bow as Hollywood's problem child. Paramount, tired of the constant drama and sensing a threat to their squeaky clean image, began to quietly freeze Bow out of major projects. As the industry transitioned to sound films, she found herself left behind. The media, emboldened by the studio's cold shoulder, hounded her with increasingly nasty rumors, many tracing back to that single ill-fated prank. By the early 1930s, Clairbeau, once untouchable, walked away from Hollywood, another star undone by the brutal combination of a harmless joke and an industry that never truly forgave rebellion. Lupe Vélez's explosive press stunt. Lupe Vélez, known as the Mexican Spitfire, was a whirlwind both on and off the set, her talent for comedy matched only by her appetite for chaos. In Hollywood, fueled by gossip, Vélez mastered the art of staying in the headlines, often by orchestrating elaborate stunts and pranks. But the one that finally ended her career wasn't just a joke gone wrong. It was an explosion that made her the cautionary tale of old Hollywood. Vélez's sense of humor was as bold as her persona. She'd show up on set with snakes in her co-stars' dressing rooms, or swap scripts to leave even veteran actors speechless. But in the early 1940s, with her film career hitting a lull, she devised a press stunt to put herself back in the spotlight. At a gala filled with Hollywood's biggest names and reporters, Vélez orchestrated a fake argument with another starlet that escalated into a slapstick food fight, cream pies, champagne, and broken glasses, flying in every direction. The intent was to create the kind of headline only she could: Spitfire turns Hollywood upside down. Instead, the incident spun out of control. The fight trashed the venue and left powerful producers fuming. Studio executives, already anxious about Vélez's unpredictable behavior and her tumultuous personal life, saw the prank as the last straw. Overnight, rumors painted her as unhinged, too wild for even the anything-goes world of 1940s Hollywood. The gossip columns, which once thrived on her antics, now labeled her a menace, and directors stopped calling. Desperate to salvage her reputation, Vélez tried to mount a comeback, but her public image, once playful and daring, was irreparably damaged. Roles dried up. The Mexican Spitfire found herself isolated, her career undone, not by a lack of talent, but by a single prank that Hollywood's power brokers refused to laugh off. Her story stands as a stark warning. In the golden age, a career could be ended not by scandal or crime, but by a joke that went a step too far. John Gilbert's soundstage sabotage. John Gilbert was once known as the great lover of silent film, a romantic icon whose smoldering looks and passionate performances sent audiences into fits of swooning. But by the late 1920s, as sound films threatened to reshape Hollywood, Gilbert's relationship with MGM studio chief Louis B. Mayer was as volatile as anything on screen. Behind their battles was a simmering undercurrent of pranks and one-upmanship, until one ill-conceived joke on the soundstage handed Mayer all the ammunition he needed to end Gilbert's reign. Gilbert, frustrated by Mayer's attempts to undermine him, decided to fight back with a prank meant to embarrass the mogul. During the filming of an important scene, Gilbert allegedly conspired with crew members to rig the sound system. When Mayer was expected to make a surprise set visit, Gilbert arranged for the microphones to blare out a pre-recorded tape of Mayer's most infamous rants, expletive-laden, full of personal insults, and peppered with Mayer's own brutal critiques of stars, directors, and the studio system. As the tirade echoed around the soundstage, laughter erupted from the cast and crew. But when Mayer realized he was the butt of the joke, the atmosphere turned icy. Instead of brushing it off, Mayer waited for the right moment to retaliate. When sound films arrived, the legend goes that Mayer ordered Gilbert's voice to be recorded with poor direction, distorting his delivery and undermining his image as a romantic leading man. Whether by technical sabotage or deliberate mismanagement, Gilbert's transition to talkies became a disaster. Rumors flew that his unusable voice ended his career, but insiders whispered that Mayer's revenge for the prank was the real culprit. Directors stopped casting him in major roles. The studio let his contract lapse. In just a few years, Gilbert went from box office gold to a forgotten relic, a cautionary tale whispered on Hollywood Boulevard. In the end, what was meant as a moment of backstage rebellion became a turning point, a single prank that shattered the uneasy truce between star and studio and sent Gilbert's glittering career into a silent spiral from which he never recovered. Tallula Bankheads' live broadcast antics. Tallula Bankhead was more than just a star. She was a force of nature, famous for her gravelly voice, sharp wit, and mischievousness that left even the most seasoned Hollywood insiders wary. Her love of pranks and disregard for propriety was legendary, but in a town run by studio power and tightly controlled image, Bankhead's boldest joke would prove to be her undoing. The stage was set in the late 1930s when Bankhead, at the height of her fame, was invited to participate in a live coast-to-coast radio broadcast, a prime opportunity to charm both Hollywood and the American public. Bankhead, never one to miss a chance for fun, decided the show needed a little more excitement. Minutes before she was set to go live, she conspired with fellow actors to accidentally swap scripts and toss in risque ad-libbed lines, knowing full well the censors would be listening. The result was chaos, mistimed cues, double entendres, and Bankhead's unmistakable laugh echoing over the airwaves as producers scrambled to salvage the show. What Bankhead saw as a harmless bit of fun was, to the network and the studio, a scandal. Sponsors threatened to pull their support, censors demanded an apology, and columnists feasted on the controversy. Worse, the studios, always suspicious of Bankhead's refusal to play by Hollywood's rules, used the incident as justification to sideline her from major film roles. The press transformed her from a beloved eccentric to a liability. Her boldness, once a draw, became a scarlet letter. The fallout was swift. Bankhead's film career in Hollywood slowed to a crawl, forcing her back to Broadway and European stages, where her antics were celebrated rather than punished. Her radio prank, meant to lampoon the stuffy seriousness of the business, instead marked her as uncontrollable. In the Golden Age, even the most beloved personalities could find themselves exiled over a joke that Hollywood's gatekeepers didn't find funny. For Bankhead, her wit never dulled, but Hollywood's doors, once wide open, closed with a silent, definitive click. Errol Flynn's courtroom gag gone wrong. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling legend of Robin Hood fame, was never far from scandal or spectacle. His devil-may-care attitude on set spilt over into real life, where he was known for wild parties, unpredictable humor, and a penchant for pushing boundaries, especially if it meant ruffling the feathers of Hollywood's elite. But in the early 1940s, one courtroom prank went so disastrously wrong that it didn't just fuel headlines, it accelerated the destruction of his once mighty career. Flynn was no stranger to legal trouble. When he found himself facing serious accusations in a Los Angeles courtroom, the proceedings drew a media circus, with every detail splashed across the tabloids. Known for his flippant humor and inability to take anything seriously, Flynn decided to play a joke during a break in the tense trial. As reporters and onlookers crowded the hallways, Flynn, with a wink to friends, donned a fake mustache and comically exaggerated glasses, a get-up straight out of slapstick, then waltzed back into the courtroom pretending to be a bumbling expert witness called to testify on his behalf. For a moment, the courtroom erupted in shocked laughter, but the judge and prosecutors were not amused. To them, and to the millions following the trial, Flynn's prank was a brazen sign of disrespect, an insult to the gravity of the charges and the justice system itself. Overnight, the public image that had once made Flynn Hollywood's golden boy took a fatal hit. The press, once eager to romanticize his rebellious streak, now portrayed him as arrogant, reckless, and out of touch. Studio executives, already nervous about his growing list of scandals, finally decided he was more trouble than he was worth. Major roles dried up. The Flynn effect, where producers banked on his charm to carry a picture, was gone. Directors began to see him as box office poison, a relic of a wilder era Hollywood was now desperate to leave behind. In the years that followed, Flynn drifted from headline to headline, his film offers dwindling to near nothing. The courtroom prank, meant to deflate a tense moment, instead punctured the last of his professional goodwill. In classic Hollywood, a single joke, delivered at the wrong time, to the wrong audience, could turn a star into an outcast. For Errol Flynn, the courtroom became not just the scene of his trial, but the stage for his last career-ending act of rebellion, Judy Garland's set pranks against studio executives. For millions, Judy Garland remains the wide-eyed ingenue who stole hearts as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, but off-camera, she was a survivor in a cutthroat studio system that chewed up talent and spat out legends. Garland, with a sharp wit and a natural sense of mischief, often used humor as armor. Her favorite targets? The very studio executives who dictated every detail of her young life. But one prank, meant to offer herself and her fellow actors a brief reprieve from constant pressure, ended up tipping the delicate balance of power and brought Garland's career at MGM to a screeching halt. By the early 1940s, Garland's schedule was relentless. Pressured by MGM bosses to lose weight, stay cheerful, and deliver flawless performances, she sought ways to push back without outright defiance. Alongside a loyal group of castmates and crew, Garland orchestrated an elaborate prank. During a high-profile visit from studio head Louis B. Mayer, the cast replaced the script for a dramatic scene with one full of inside jokes, double entendres, and thinly veiled digs at studio policies. Mayer, expecting to witness a demonstration of Garland's professionalism, instead found himself confronted with a surreal performance that left the crew stifling laughter and the boss's face growing redder by the second. What might have been brushed off in a less tense era became a flashpoint. Studio higher-ups were livid at the perceived insubordination. In a matter of weeks, rumors began to swirl about Garland's instability and lack of discipline. Producers began sidelining her from prestige projects, reassigning her to less desirable roles. The press, always eager for a scandal, pounced on any signs of trouble, amplifying every misstep. Garland, emotionally exhausted and increasingly isolated, saw her influence at MGM evaporate. Eventually, Garland was released from her contract, a shocking move for someone who had once been the studio's golden girl. Her set prank, meant as an act of resistance and camaraderie, became the final straw for executives looking for any excuse to cut ties. In the world of Golden Age Hollywood, a single moment of levity could erase years of stardom. For Judy Garland, a joke on the wrong audience marked the end of her MGM era and the beginning of a far tougher chapter. Martha Ray's radio prank on NBC Brass. Martha Ray's career was built on a gift for outrageous comedy and a willingness to do anything for a laugh, whether on stage, screen, or radio. Her voice and slapstick antics made her a staple of the 1930s and 1940s Hollywood, adored by working-class fans and fellow performers alike. Yet, in an industry tightly controlled by executives with little patience for chaos, her biggest radio prank, aimed squarely at the NBC brass, marked the end of her ascent. It happened during a nationally broadcast variety show. Ray, ever the daredevil, decided to give the staid network a taste of her wild side. She convinced her co-stars to help swap the script for a surprise segment in which Ray would impersonate the NBC president, complete with over-the-top caricature and spot-on mimicking of his most pompous speeches. As the sketch unfolded live on air, Ray lampooned network policies, poked fun at corporate penny-pinching, and delivered inside jokes that had the cast and crew in stitches. The audience roared, but the laughter didn't last. The NBC executives listening in their private suites were furious. What Ray considered harmless satire was, in their eyes, an unforgivable act of disrespect. They moved quickly to have her next shows canceled and called off future appearances. Word spread quickly in the insular world of broadcast entertainment. Martha Ray was too unpredictable, too risky, too much of a liability for network radio. Film and stage producers, eager to avoid similar headaches, became wary of hiring her. Almost overnight, Ray went from radio sensation to persona non grata, her opportunities drying up as quickly as they had come. The radio prank, meant to be a jab at uptight bosses, was rebranded by industry gatekeepers as a career-ending act of insubordination. In classic Hollywood, making the wrong people the butt of your joke could cost you everything. For Martha Ray, it was a lesson learned too late, and one that left her legacy tinged with both brilliance and regret. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds Hollywood hoax. Orson Welles was already a sensation in New York with his Mercury Theater troupe, but his infamous 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast would transform him into a household name and, ironically, become the prank that torched his path in Hollywood before it truly began. Welles, always the consummate showman, relished the chance to blur the line between fiction and reality. With his signature baritone and impeccable timing, he staged a radio drama so convincing that thousands of listeners believed Earth was under attack by Martians. The resulting nationwide panic made headlines, infuriated officials, and catapulted Welles into the spotlight. But in Hollywood, the aftermath wasn't all applause. Studio executives were quick to invite Welles out west, eager to harness his genius but wary of his recklessness. The prank, which Welles insisted was a misunderstood experiment in storytelling, quickly became a cautionary tale. MGM and Warner Brothers executives, fearful of his unpredictable style and the bad press that could follow, began attaching riders and restrictions to every offer. Welles's legendary contract with RKO was one of the most generous in history, but it came with watchful oversight and simmering resentment behind the scenes. When Welles moved on to direct Citizen Kane, the old wounds from his radio prank haunted him. Studio heads hesitated to fully support his vision, and when William Randolph Hearst, himself a frequent target of Welles's biting wit, declared war on the film, Hollywood's gatekeepers didn't rush to defend him. Welles's reputation for bold, boundary-pushing pranks and disregard for authority made him a pariah among the power brokers. After a few more battles and unfinished projects, Welles found his Hollywood welcome worn thin. The very prank that had launched him into stardom also marked him as too dangerous for a system obsessed with control. In the years that followed, Welles drifted between Europe and independent productions, celebrated as a genius, but rarely trusted with another major Hollywood project. His Martian invasion was the hoax that defined him, and the one that ended his future in the town that first beckoned with open arms. Peg Entwistle's practical joke on the H in Hollywood. Peg Entwistle's name is forever linked with Hollywood's most haunting legend, but few remember that before her tragic end, she was known for a bold streak of humor and a penchant for the dramatic. The young actress arrived in Los Angeles with dreams of stardom and a reputation for staging pranks to cut through the suffocating seriousness of the studio system. Her most audacious act would become the stuff of whispered legend, a late-night dare to climb the Hollywoodland sign and rearrange the letters, a stunt meant to amuse friends and needle the self-important executives at RKO who had dismissed her talents. The prank, executed on a moonlit evening, saw Peg scaling the giant H and hanging a makeshift banner that read, "Help," poking fun at the city's relentless pressure and the desperation simmering beneath every Hollywood dream. Friends who witnessed it laughed, but word quickly spread to the local press, who pounced on the symbolism and painted Entwistle as an unhinged outsider. Studio bosses, already cold to her after a single RKO film, were incensed by the negative attention. What she saw as gallows humor became, in their eyes, a sign she couldn't handle the industry's demands. Within days, Entwistle found herself blacklisted by casting directors wary of her unstable behavior. The industry, quick to idolize rebels, but just as quick to discard them, closed ranks. The jobs dried up, the phone stopped ringing, and the city's newest import became an instant cautionary tale. The infamous prank, intended to be a tongue-in-cheek commentary on Hollywood's soul-crushing indifference, instead became her undoing. In the end, Peg Entwistle's story is a chilling reminder that in Golden Age Hollywood, even the smallest joke could have the gravest consequences. Her legacy lives on as a tragic emblem, not only of dashed dreams, but of how a single prank can echo down the canyons of fame long after the laughter fades. George Rafts' studio switch prank backfires. George Raft was the original tough guy of 1930s Hollywood, a man whose real-life mob connections and icy screen presence made him a star in films like Scarface and Each Dawn I Die. But what many forget is that Raft was also a notorious prankster, especially when it came to testing the patience of studio bosses. His most infamous stunt, meant as a harmless jab at studio rivalries, ended up costing him his foothold in the industry he once ruled. Raft's reputation as a difficult negotiator was matched only by his penchant for gamesmanship. In the late 1930s, he became increasingly frustrated with being typecast by Warner Brothers and began courting rival studios. In a daring prank that was whispered about in industry circles for years, Raft leaked a fake press release announcing he'd secretly signed a contract with a competing studio. The news hit the trades just as Warner Brothers was preparing to announce him for their next big gangster picture. At first, the prank was pure Hollywood theater. Raft thought he'd pressure Warner Brothers into offering him a better deal, or at least get a rise out of the famously controlling studio head Jack Warner. Instead, the joke misfired. Warner, never one to tolerate being played, immediately canceled Raft's upcoming projects and blacklisted him from future productions. The other studio, spooked by the sudden scandal and afraid of damaging their own studio relations, backed out of negotiations entirely. Raft went from being one of the most sought-after stars in Hollywood to scrambling for roles. Directors and producers, wary of his unpredictability, began to view him as a liability. His string of bad choices, turning down roles in films like The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, suddenly seemed less like savvy business and more like the fallout of someone who had lost his footing. Raft's career, once a lesson in surviving Hollywood's shifting tides, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing business with mischief. What was meant as a clever prank to prove his power instead exposed just how fragile a star's influence could be. In the end, Hollywood didn't just laugh off Raft's joke. They closed the door behind him, proving that in the studio era, the real bosses always got the last word. In the end, Hollywood's golden age was a place where power, pride, and image mattered more than the punchline. One ill-timed prank could destroy everything, no matter how bright your star had shone. Behind every laugh was a risk, and behind every risk, a studio boss waiting to pull the plug. If old Hollywood teaches us anything, it's this. The most dangerous joke wasn't always the one told out loud. It was the one that cost you everything when the curtain finally fell.